Hi, I am Jennifer Purcell, and welcome to my podcast, Living with an Invisible Learning Challenge, where we will discuss, discover, and learn more about the challenges and triumphs of those with NLD and other learning challenges. I do have a website for this podcast, and it is called livingwithnld.com. I also have a Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter account for the podcast. They are all under the same name, which is Living with NLD. I also have a YouTube channel for the podcast, which can be found by Googling the title of the podcast, which is Living with an Invisible Learning Challenge. I would like to tell you about a nonprofit that I use for my research for this podcast. It is called the NVLD Project, and I use their blog for my research. They are a nonprofit that is based in New York and is trying to get NVLD back on the DSM, and they provide many resources for people with NVLD on their website. I'll provide you with the website for them in the podcast description. All proceeds from the ads on this podcast will be donated towards the NVLD project. Please feel free to explore the other topics on the podcast, and hopefully you will learn something new from them. I hope you enjoy today's episodes. Also, I have podcast swag on Markful. I believe that's the name of the website I'm using now. I also have it on Redbubble. I'll give you the links in the description for this podcast episode, and you can take a look. Both websites have different prices, and they have some discounts going on also. And one has t-shirts and some apparel that you can buy and some drinkware. So see which one you would like better.
Picture day, and they were gonna try and force him to go to picture day because the flash freaks him out. And I'm like, you can send in a picture for picture day. Like, they have done that before. It's like a known thing. He doesn't like picture day. And then I'm glad that the teacher agreed with me. Like, yeah, let's just not even try to take him towards the auditorium, because he knows, and he's going to start, freaking out, and it's like, what's the point of having him have a tantrum when he could stay emotionally regulated? What's the point of just so he does that? Like, that's not gonna really affect his life. Like, he learning to stand in a line and walk and wait for your picture to be taken, like, when he's older he'll understand probably, and maybe if he needs to take an ID picture at work, I don't know, it's not what is. And I'm so glad that they didn't make him, because I was like, that's kind of where I get very sensitive toward people like having stigma towards autism, because it's like really silly to me.
No, that makes sense, because I can think of some of the clients I worked with in my previous job, where I worked with kids on the spectrum and ADHD ones as well. They definitely had their share of tantrums or meltdowns, and some of them got pretty bad.
Yeah.
I mean, in terms of the aggressive standpoint, and that's where your training comes in, and you try to respond in a way that won't escalate it, and being able to protect yourself and protect the students so they don't hurt themselves.
Absolutely. Oh my gosh. How long did you work with them? Or do you still do some of that?
I did that for my longest one was for almost a year. It was 9 months.
Oh wow.
And I did have one client who had ADHD. Well, not, he still has it, but in the past, for me, he had ADHD and autism, and I think it's 7. Are you in elementary school when you were 7?
Yes.
Yeah.
What, like first grade, maybe second grade?
Yeah. So he was, I was trying to remember. But yeah, he was 7, and he was pretty aggressive at times. And it was good that, he was always with his ABA therapists, us, and with his OT, he wasn't in a general classroom because of
Yeah.
his behavior. And yeah, so that was good in his case in terms of trying to be able to handle that. Let's see, what else was I gonna ask? I think I only had a couple more questions. With the parents, I don't know if you've met any of them with your students yet, but what kind of involvement do the parents usually have that you have met in terms of wanting to help their kid?
I've seen both. I'm still getting to know them, but I have met a few of them in person.
Mhm.
It's there is a barrier that a lot of them are Spanish speaking families, and I'm not super fluent in Spanish, so I have to arrange the translators that we have. Or sometimes it's nice if the child is, pretty
Mhm.
fluent in English and they can just kind of help translate. But they either I've seen a lot, you see like the parent that like really doesn't care, and you're
Right.
begging them to come to the IEP meeting, just to involve them. Or there's, the parent that is like overly, wanting more and more services, or wanting more and more things for their kids to qualify
Mhm.
for, where their child just doesn't actually meet that uh diagnosis, or
Mhm.
that need. Or there are plenty of parents that are like really nice and yet like just, always show up to the meetings. So I've
Mhm.
seen all three so far. Mostly just I do have uh like my first IEP meeting. I'm so excited. It's a family that is like notorious for like always just being so kind, and
Mm.
I've met them in person. They came to back to school night just because I asked them to come.
Mhm.
They said, "Oh yeah, we came because you emailed us," and I was like, "Oh great," So it was really nice. But yeah, I do I'm looking forward, not looking forward, but I'm ready for the challenge of trying to get parents in the conversation,
Mhm.
um, if they're wanting to be.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I would imagine that sometimes the parent, it would probably be challenging if the parent isn't involved with the IEP, right?
Yeah, because you have to keep scheduling the meeting like it's
Right.
happening, even, because if it's like three chances or something and they just cancel the meeting, but you're supposed to
Mm.
have them there to like go over the accommodations.
Mhm.
So it can be like, there's other teachers that are like, oh, this parent never shows up. And I'm like, you never know. Like you wanna believe that maybe they'll show up for the parents that don't ever show up,
Yeah.
because it's heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking to see that. And or sometimes they're really not able to, especially since the IEP meetings at our school are always during the day. Like they don't ever do them after school.
Mm.
So I
And
mean,
they
I
might be
that's nice.
working. Yeah.
I know, which is like kind of like, well, that's, that doesn't work for every parent. I mean, that's nice for us because we don't
Right.
have to do a meeting after school, but that's not really how it will always work.
Yeah, that makes sense. Um, so, oh, and then one other question was, I know sometimes, at least I've had a little bit of experience with this, that sometimes parents can try to give constructive feedback on how to help their kid, and it's not really that helpful because they maybe they don't know their kid as well as they think they do.
Yeah.
Um,
Yep.
have you run into that?
It's so hard because you don't want to disrespect a parent because you are
Mm-hmm.
not a child's parent, and that is not always your place to say something. I did have it like this summer. I had a girl who right now she's diagnosed as autistic, but the school psych thinks maybe other things might be going on, but
Mm.
she got so overwhelmed that she was shaking and hiding under a desk. And
Oh.
a lot of when I had this in it's hard because like her mom would say, you just have to say, you have to be a big girl, you have to be a big girl. And
Mm.
I didn't really I did that a little bit, but it doesn't feel right. But also it's
Mm-hmm.
like I don't know the student well enough to know where the line is of what is actually like I'm getting overwhelmed, like flooded with like overwhelmed social emotionally, or what is like, not wanting to work.
Right.
So it really is hard because you have to be respectful because they are their child's, that's their parent. Like you are not their parent. You're never going to be their parent. That is their child above all else. Even, sometimes we have to see really sad things. You know, I've had to report to CPS before for different things of just like neglect or whatever when I had other jobs working in schools, not at this school yet, hopefully not, but it is really challenging because you have to be respectful of their parenting style if it's not like completely wrong. Because I don't know what it's like. I don't have children. I personally don't want children. So it is definitely a delicate line.
Yeah, that is delicate. And, trying to understand when the client I was talking about earlier, he at one point said that he didn't really like he had 4 different ABA therapists that he saw throughout the week, and there was one team that he really liked and then one team that he didn't like, which was my team. And which was weird because like he liked us in the beginning and then it went downhill. So the reason I bring that up is because the parent will listen. I think it's hard for the parent to listen not only to their child but also to the teachers in terms of how the relationship is going between them two, and to try to prioritize who is telling the truth and who is maybe skewing it a little bit. And I would think that maybe sometimes the child skews it more than the teacher.
Yeah, definitely.
So yeah, I can definitely understand where you're saying where you do have to respect them and to try to have to try to understand where they're coming from as a parent. And I can imagine it was hard for that one girl who was really overwhelmed there and was overstimulated.
It broke my heart because we had a boy with the same diagnosis, but it's like, oh, well, he gets to do whatever he wants. Oh, it's okay that he's doing this. And I just, it was just a hard summer where I had a lot of students that actually needed like one-on-one aids, but we didn't have the capacity to have one-on-one aids. I had 2 aids and they were great. But there were some times where I was like, oh, I wish she would have done this and not that. But they were actually middle school aides. So but they were with my elementary class this summer. So it was interesting. It was every day was different because we had a lot of students with a lot of different high needs. So sometimes it was just like, well, okay, there's nothing educational happening the rest of the day. We're really just trying to work on getting some behaviors, helping them interact with each other, self-soothe.
One question that just kind of came to my mind was I was curious how you got into special ed and you knew you wanted to do that because you said you were doing psychology before, which is definitely similar.
Yeah. So I really have just only been doing SPED teaching for like since December. What happened was I never knew I wanted to teach. To be honest with you, I thought all the teacher majors at my school were really annoying. I don't know, because it's kind of like it's like, well, why do you want to be the person that tells everybody what to do? I mean, there's a part of me that likes that, that.
Right.
So, and I also got annoyed with the fellow psychology majors. I was a psych major undergrad. So I was at a job that wasn't really working for me. I was a mental health clinician where I got hired to help people with working on resumes, but then they were slowly but surely trying to give me some like clients that had a really high need that had some struggles that were too similar to mine. And basically the organization was like trying to get me to do licensed clinician work when I was not licensed. I only had a BA in psychology and I just didn't like the organization. I like fought them so hard. I even got everyone in my office a raise before I left,
Mm-hmm.
which I have never done, but I fought them so hard that they
Wow.
needed to give us better care that I got everyone a raise before I left. Didn't get, barely had any time there when I had the raise, but I left just because I was like, my mental health is broken.
Mm.
And I had already started pursuing my substitute license because they were paying subs a lot during the pandemic. And I applied to the school that I work at now.
Mm-hmm.
And uh, I knew about special ed because my mom is a special ed teacher too. Uh, and they asked me, well, I applied just to be a substitute there, like randomly, like on call, or they had other positions that were roving, but not in particular just special ed department. And
Mm-hmm.
they hired me right when they interviewed me because they were like, well, what do you have experience with? And I said, well, I have tried to be ABA therapist before. Jennifer, I cannot, that
It's
ABA
hard.
therapy is so difficult. And the
Yeah.
one job I had it with was an organization that was not supportive of their therapists at all. So like, I just couldn't even try doing it.
Mm-hmm.
I've been a respite worker for a child that had, it's like Angelman syndrome. I forget. I was his respite worker for a little bit, but that was the only experience I came in with. And then I had nannied a lot and taught like and done day camp. So they hired me
Mm-hmm.
as the roving sped sub, even though I was like, oh, I know stuff about sped, but I just kind of wanted to be a substitute teacher. And then that was a really cool experience because I got to interview, like I got to see every part of being a sped teacher, like because I was interacting with
Mm-hmm.
the sped teachers, like all the sped teachers, I was just trying to support them and watch their
Mm-hmm.
classes. Um, and even my boss said when she interviewed me, she was like, "You're going to be a sped teacher someday," and I was like, "Okay." And I just honestly didn't try it earlier just because I didn't want to be exactly what my mom does. But I really like it because I like the part of it where because you manage a caseload of students, you're just
Mm-hmm.
keeping notes on them, you're having to schedule them, you're trying to make sure they're getting everything they need. And that's what I like because I'm used to managing a caseload, but it's usually adults who
Right.
have mental health issues or adults that are experiencing homelessness. But it's a lot easier for those of us that have like our own, mental health stuff if it's like a
Mm-hmm.
child because they're cuter and they're so vulnerable, and it's kind of sad to say, but it's like earlier intervention of helping
Right.
before. I mean, I can't promise what happens to them after they graduate elementary school, but
Mm-hmm.
it feels more hopeful. And
Yeah.
unfortunately, I just am the not unfortunately, I have a personality. I'm very like musical theatery, I guess if you would call it. So I'm good with like children. I've always been able to get jobs with children, and I don't mean to say that in like a manipulative way, but like I like working with children,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm well suited for it. So that's kind of how I got into it by accident. And they I feel like they tricked me. They made me like it so much.
Oh, that's okay. I mean, I think it's good that you like your job because you uh there's a saying, if you like your job or if you love your job, that you'll never feel like you're working a day in your life, you know. And
Yeah.
I think that's very true because um I didn't like my job when I was an ABA therapist. It was too challenging for me personally. That's why I didn't
It's
like it.
very challenging.
Um, and I liked working with the clients because I feel like I could empathize with them because of being neurodivergent as well. But I didn't like it, see them experience their tantrums or not knowing what to do in that moment. And it was hard for me to work through the different ABA programs um, that they had. It was easier when I did a different, when I was a life coach and I was working with adults who were on the spectrum, because
Oh,
then it wasn't ABA therapy, it was just, helping them with their job or something like that. That was easier for me.
I have a
Um,
hard time as well with the outbursts of emotion, like
yeah.
it's very challenging. And you did it even longer than I did. I I was not an ABA therapist very long. I like working with children with autism and I know how to like help them in the moment. But I mean, I'm not an aide. I don't hang out with the child each day and I tell all the aides at my school, I'm like, you are the backbone of this school. and if you're not being told this enough, like, you need to know that. Like, for
Right.
the
Yeah.
it's a hard job. It's a hard job. It doesn't get congratulated enough. Not saying that it's like, oh, these children are they're just like the most vulnerable and like so misunderstood. So like all the time they're just getting stuff thrown at them that would, super avoidable if, if the adults that were with them just knew.
Right. I agree with you. And also I would say that, you know, I think it would be easier if each case you had as an ABA therapist where there was a tantrum, if it was, the same kind of tantrum, because then it would be easier to handle, but it's not. It's not going to be the same kind because each child responds to things differently.
Yeah.
And on different intensity levels also. So that I think makes it even more challenging when you're an ABA or you're a special ed teacher, because then you are having to think on your feet and improvise and be like, okay, well, what do I do?
Yeah.
And if you're neurodivergent and you're doing that, you're in that role, it's challenging, at least it was for me, to think quickly of what to do. And that, I would imagine that becomes easier over time when you're in that kind of role.
Yeah, for sure. I hate to say it, but I've had a lot of experiences of like adults in a lot of like trauma and hurting like yell at me. So like a child's tantrum is kind of like, this doesn't faze me. I mean, sometimes it's like really hard to hear, but it's most of the time it feels safer just as an adult, because I'm like, well, this is a child. And I'm thankful that I have had those experiences, even though they weren't great, that I feel like I have the stamina to be able to help children when they're having meltdowns. Thankfully, I haven't had that many meltdowns yet. I don't think I've had a meltdown yet this school year, but there will be some, of course there will be.
Yeah. There probably will be some, and I'm sure you'll be able to think of what to do in that moment. That was basically all the questions, unless you have one that I didn't think of.
No, I like that conversation. If you could keep out any part, if you can shorten the part I'm talking about the AIDS I had during the summer, maybe take that out. They weren't my favorite.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't want to sound like I'm saying something bad about them, or I don't know. I want to keep the children. I'm not going to like promote this probably myself, but I also don't have like anyone from I would promote it to my friends, not like anyone that might see it from work. Even though I didn't say any child's name, it just feels better. I'll just share it to like friends, family and friends.
Yeah. Well, what I can do is, once the recording is processed, I can email it to you and you can let me know what to edit out.
Okay.
Because I might forget if I don't have an email somewhere with it. Yeah. So that'll work best, because then you can listen to it and you can figure out then.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think I said anything. I didn't say anything. I said that they were middle school AIDS and that I'll listen to the recording.
Yeah, that's fine.
I also want to take time to let you know that this podcast is sponsored by Spotify. And if you would like to support this podcast and keep it going, you can donate through Spotify, or you can donate through Patreon, which is also a sponsor for podcasts. And on Patreon, I started to put different material up there. For $5, you can get some episodes that don't have any ads to it. And for $10, you can get the same episode along with the transcript for it, at least the link to it that is on my website. And you can listen to the episode while you read along to it. And also, BetterHelp sponsors this podcast, and BetterHelp is an online therapy program that has helped millions of people get out of whatever situation that they may be in that it requires therapy, whether that's depression or anxiety, or maybe they're going through a difficult period with being a healing from something in their past that happened. I know for myself, I've been in 8 years of therapy with a different online program than BetterHelp, but I can speak in general terms that therapy is very effective and can help you change your life around for the better. It certainly has done that for mine. And I provide all the links for these sponsorships in the podcast description if you want to check them out. Thank you.
As I wrap up, there are some things I would like to share with you. I do have a website for this podcast. It is called livingwithnld.com. I also have a Facebook and Instagram page for this podcast. It is called Living with NLD. I will include the links for those in the description. In conclusion, I would like to hear from my audience. If you know individuals with NLD that I could interview for this podcast, please email me at livingwithnld@gmail.com. What are you interested in learning about NLD? I know I'm not an expert, but I do know I have the living experience of having it. I would like you to practice journaling about your gifts and differences. Also see if there is a way that you can make that difference become easier for you to do than it originally was. Thank you for listening today, and please go to my YouTube channel and subscribe to it. Thank you. Bye.